Hello, my name is Erin Garner. I am a teacher at an elementary school in Boulder, Colorado. The story I'm about to tell happened more than 3 decades ago, but the memories remain as vivid as if they occurred yesterday. First, I want to clarify something. I've always considered myself a practical, grounded person. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't see, hear, or touch. My life was perfectly ordinary. I taught my students, spent weekends with friends, looked after my home, nothing out of the usual. I grew up in a household that wasn't especially religious. We went to church on holidays or when invited by friends, but not because of deep personal faith. As I grew older, I leaned further into skepticism. I truly believed science could explain everything, and anything outside that framework was likely fantasy. I remember during college, we had a debate in one of our philosophy classes about the existence of God. I was vocal, maybe even a little arrogant, arguing that religion was just a human construct, a way for people to cope with mortality and the unknown. I believed it firmly. Little did I know how drastically my worldview would be shaken in the years ahead. At the time of my experience, I was married to Holden, a deeply spiritual and kind-hearted man. He never pushed his beliefs on me, but he did gently encourage me to stay open. We'd talk late into the night sometimes, he'd share his views, and I'd counter with my logic. I admired his sincerity, but in my heart, I thought he was clinging to a beautiful illusion. Life moved on as usual, until I noticed a small lump forming on the right side of my neck. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing, but over time, it grew. As a teacher, I stood in front of classrooms every day, and I became increasingly self-conscious. It began to chip away at my confidence. I decided to see a doctor. Brody Sullivan examined me and told me there was no immediate cause for alarm. He advised against surgery, saying it was benign and not pressing, but I insisted. Whether out of fear or vanity, I wanted it gone. After a few more appointments and discussions, Dr. Sullivan finally agreed to schedule the operation. It felt like a simple medical decision, one more item to check off my to-do list. I had no idea that it would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey. I still struggle to describe. On the day of the surgery, I was anxious but composed. I lay on the operating table under the bright surgical lights, my mind racing as the anesthetic began to take hold. "Doctor." Sullivan leaned over me, smiling kindly. "You're in good hands, Erin. We'll have you back on your feet in no time," he said. I gave him a nod and closed my eyes, expecting to wake up groggy and sore, with a bandage on my neck and a clear path to recovery. But what happened next shattered every expectation I had about life, death, and everything in between. It started with an odd sensation, like I was being yanked from my body. Not gently, it was intense, forceful, like being sucked into a vacuum at the speed of light. I couldn't scream. I had no voice. I couldn't move. There was nothing to hold on to, just the feeling of falling, or rather, being hurled through a tunnel of complete blackness. Time lost all meaning. There was no way to tell if seconds or centuries were passing. It was terrifying. And then, it stopped. Suddenly, I was immersed in a light so radiant, so warm, I can only compare it to being wrapped in love itself. This light didn't hurt my eyes. It soothed them. It felt alive. I breathed it in like air, and it filled me with peace I had never known. As my vision adjusted, I realized I was standing in front of a delicate golden bridge, the kind you'd imagine in dreams. It arched over a stream of impossibly clear water that shimmered like liquid crystal. The sound of the current was like music, soft, harmonious, and somehow familiar. I took a cautious step forward and then noticed I was not alone. On the far side of the bridge stood a radiant being. She glowed with a light that didn't come from the sun, but from within herself. A feminine figure, with flowing golden hair and wings spun from light itself. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole essence. I knew without a word that her name was Lumiel. Beside her stood a group of boys, all dressed in white. Their faces radiated innocence and peace. Their eyes, each one, held the kind of joy that brought tears to mine. All my intellectual defenses began to crumble. In their presence, my skepticism seemed not only distant, it felt irrelevant. Everything I had believed about the universe being cold and indifferent, it simply didn't fit here. The next moment brought something even more astonishing. The landscape shifted, or perhaps my awareness expanded. It was like the universe folded open before me. Every question I had ever asked about love, time, space, life, suffering, felt as if it was being answered without words. Then it happened. I felt the presence of what I can only call God, not a man in the sky, not a booming voice from above, but a presence, a force of pure energy, pure love, and complete awareness. It was everywhere within me and beyond me, and it knew me. There was no judgment, only complete understanding. I didn't feel examined. I felt embraced. I sensed the interconnectedness of all things, how every act of kindness mattered, how every thought left a ripple in this fabric of existence. The love I felt was not like human love, it was absolute, penetrating every fiber of my being. It saw me completely and loved me still. Every regret, every failure, every time I'd mocked people of faith or dismissed spiritual things, it all dissolved in the light of this compassion. I couldn't tell if I was there for moments or millennia, but I didn't want to leave. Eventually, though, the light began to pull away, gently, as if giving me one last embrace. Lumiel smiled again. No words, but her eyes seemed to say, "You must go back." And I did. I woke up in the recovery room, tears streaming down my face.
Doctor.
Sullivan was there, and so was Holden, holding my hand, his eyes filled with concern and relief. I couldn't speak right away. Not because I was in pain, though I was, but because I had no idea how to explain what had happened. I later told Holden everything. He didn't doubt me for a second. He simply said, "I knew one day you'd see it." And I had. What I experienced can't be confined to a single religion or belief system. It was deeper than words, larger than doctrines. I still teach, but now I also listen, truly listen, to the deeper questions in my students' hearts. And when people ask if I believe in God, I smile. Because in that instant, every religious doctrine I had ever heard or studied seemed small and limited in comparison to what I was experiencing. I came to the realization that no religion, no sacred text, and no school of human philosophy could ever fully convey the true nature of the divine. It wasn't just a matter of interpretation or language, it was far beyond anything our limited minds could fully grasp. The divine wasn't something to be neatly defined, it had to be experienced. This understanding wasn't just intellectual, it was visceral. It reverberated through every part of my being. The moment was so powerful that it shook the very foundations of what I had always believed. I, who once prided myself on being a skeptic, a rational thinker, someone who leaned entirely on logic and evidence, now stood in front of something so enormous, so transcendent, that logic itself bowed before it. It was as though, in one instant, the curtain between the physical world and the true nature of existence had been pulled back. What I saw wasn't a throne in the sky or an old man with a beard, nothing like the images we've been taught. Instead, I felt the presence of an all-encompassing consciousness, a force that wasn't somewhere out there, but present everywhere, within atoms, within stars, and most remarkably, within me. God, as I came to understand in that moment, was not a being bound to a single form or creed. It was the infinite itself, a vast and intelligent energy that filled the universe and gave life to all things. This force wasn't watching from above. It was flowing through everything, timeless, silent, and endlessly loving. The most staggering part of the experience was the realization that I wasn't separate from it. I wasn't just looking at God, I was within God, and God was within me. Every barrier that separated me from everything else dissolved. It felt like being part of an infinite ocean and discovering that I was both the wave and the water. The sense of unity was profound. I could feel my connection to all living things. Every tree, every animal, every person I had ever met or would meet. It was like my consciousness had expanded beyond my body and stretched across the fabric of the universe itself. The comfort and peace in that union were indescribable. It was the purest belonging I had ever felt. In that state of expanded awareness, I understood something else. Physical death was not the end. Far from it. What we call death is merely a doorway, a passage from one form of being into another. Our true essence, our soul, our consciousness does not perish. It continues, evolves, learns, and grows. The fear of death that had lingered in the background of my life, quiet but constant, evaporated completely. I now saw death as a sacred transition, not a tragic end. Life, I understood, wasn't just about being born, aging, and dying. It was about evolving spiritually, deepening our understanding, and participating in the ongoing unfolding of the universe's own awakening. Every single choice we make, every thought, every action, every intention matters. Nothing is wasted. Even our pain has a role in shaping the collective experience, and through all of it, the most important element is love. But not the kind of love that's conditional or based on need or familiarity. I'm talking about a love so vast and unconditional that it binds galaxies together. A love that doesn't require justification or reciprocation. A love that is the very structure of creation itself. That was the overwhelming message of the experience. Love is the engine of everything. As the intensity of this revelation began to slowly ease, I sensed a transformation taking place within me. It wasn't just intellectual or emotional, it was complete. Something had shifted deep inside. I knew with certainty that I would never be the same person again. My priorities, my values, even my sense of identity had been realigned. Though I was still in that elevated state, I began to sense something changing. As I was trying to absorb and commit to memory every detail of what I had experienced, a jarring force interrupted me. It was like being pulled by an unseen hand, fast, fierce, and unavoidable. I was being yanked away, as if the moment had ended, and I was being evicted from paradise. The descent was terrifying. It felt like falling from an immeasurable height through layers of darkness. But what hurt wasn't the fear of falling, it was the heartbreak of leaving. I didn't want to go. I begged in my mind, pleaded to stay, but no voice came from me. I was completely helpless. Then, suddenly, I was floating above my physical body. I hovered over the operating room, suspended in space, looking down at the scene unfolding below like a silent observer. There I was, lying motionless on the surgical table. My skin looked pale. My body seemed foreign, like an empty shell. Dr. Sullivan and his team moved quickly and urgently. Their voices were raised, faces tight with focus and fear. Alarms were ringing. The air was tense. "We're losing her." I heard one of the nurses shout, and in that instant, I heard a sound that shook me, my own screams. But they weren't from my physical mouth. These were soul-deep screams, raw, anguished, silent to those in the room but loud within the spiritual plane. It was the sound of a soul being dragged back before it was ready. They wheeled me rapidly out of the operating room and into the infirmary. I could see everything from above, but no one seemed to notice my presence. I was still screaming, but only I could hear it. My spirit was caught in a tug of war, unsure of where it belonged. Gradually, I began to feel myself pulled back into my body. It was not smooth. It was like being forced into a space that no longer fit. I felt confined, restricted. I had tasted boundlessness. And now I was returning to limitations, flesh, gravity. When I finally opened my eyes in the infirmary, everything felt strange. The air felt thick. My limbs felt unfamiliar. Around me, the nurses were bustling, relieved to see me awake, but puzzled by my tears, because I was crying, not from pain, but from grief. I had just left behind something more real than anything I had ever known. I tried to smile. I wanted to speak, to tell them everything, but no words came. I was overwhelmed. The contrast between where I had just been and where I was now was too vast to describe. Then the phone at my bedside rang. One of the nurses picked it up, exchanged a few words, then turned to me with a gentle look. "It's your mother," she said softly. "She wants to speak with you." Still dizzy and trying to make sense of everything, I took the receiver in my hand. My mother's voice came through, warm and trembling, grounding me like nothing else could. "Mum, I'm okay," I said, though the word felt insufficient. I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I? As we spoke, my mind wandered. How would I ever explain this? Could I even begin to describe what I had seen? What I had felt? Would anyone believe me? I knew then that my greatest challenge wouldn't be physical recovery. It would be reintegrating into life with this knowledge, this truth, burning inside me. Then, out of nowhere, a memory I hadn't thought of in decades surged forward like a wave. I was young, traveling through Asia in the 1970s. I had gotten lost in a chaotic bus station in a city whose name I no longer remember. People shouted, bodies pushed against one another. I was overwhelmed, close to panic. And then, through the noise and confusion, I heard it. It was my mother's voice, clear as if she were right next to me, calling my name, just like she did in my childhood when she realized I was about to hurt myself. "Erin." The voice called out with urgency and unmistakable concern. Without even thinking, I clutched my body tightly and drew my backpack close to my chest. A moment later, I felt a jarring bump against my shoulder. A man had tried to squeeze past me, his hand grazing the very spot where my bag holding all my documents and cash had been just seconds earlier. At the time, I didn't give the moment much thought. I was too anxious about catching the bus and continuing my journey. But now, lying in this hospital bed, the memory returned with alarming clarity. How could my mother have sensed danger from thousands of miles away? Was it possible she possessed some kind of intuition, perhaps even a spiritual awareness I had never acknowledged or understood? That memory triggered others. Times when she seemed to know things no one had told her. Moments I had always brushed aside as lucky guesses or motherly instinct. Now, in the aftermath of my own near-death experience, those moments carried a new weight. I began to question if there had always been a connection between us, something more than biological. Had she somehow accessed the same spiritual dimension I had seen briefly? Had she touched the veil between worlds long before I did? The thought stirred both wonder and discomfort. I wanted to ask her about it, about that day in Asia, about what she remembered, and whether she had ever felt something inexplicable. But I hesitated. What if she didn't understand? What if she thought I was losing my mind? After all, I wouldn't have believed myself a week ago. A nurse entered the room, interrupting my thoughts. She checked my pulse, adjusted the IV line, and asked if I needed anything for the pain. I nodded politely, answering her with routine words while my mind floated somewhere far away. I felt torn between two worlds. the rational, composed self I had cultivated for decades. And this new, raw version of myself, awakened by something far beyond science or logic. The vision I had during surgery had changed everything. How could I return to normal? How could I go back to teaching math, correcting grammar, running errands, pretending like I hadn't just glimpsed the eternal? Still, I tried. After being discharged from the hospital, I told myself I could pick up where I left off. I thought routine would numb the noise inside me. But the truth was undeniable. Something inside me had shifted permanently. And rather than embrace it, I did what I now see was a mistake. I buried it, doubled down on skepticism. I leaned harder into my identity as a secular intellectual. It was almost as if I were trying to erase the entire experience through sheer force of logic. I kept myself endlessly busy, jogging, grading papers, lesson planning, organizing the pantry. If I stopped moving, the memories would come back, and I wasn't ready to face them. Holden, my husband, was gentle but persistent. He had always believed in life after death, and when I told him the basics of what had happened, his eyes lit up with hope. He wanted to talk about it, reflect on it, pray together, but I couldn't. Every time he brought it up, I changed the subject or simply walked out of the room. I told myself I didn't want to entertain delusions. One night, I collapsed into tears in the bathroom. Holden found me there, crouched beside the sink. "What's going on, Erin?" he asked, pulling me gently into his arms. I wanted to tell him. I wanted so badly to let it out, the fear, the awe, the confusion. But the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain something that defies the very logic you built your life on? So I lied. "Just overwhelmed with work," I whispered. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. Holden always gave me space when I needed it, even when he didn't understand. Years passed. On the outside, I was the same Erin Garner, logical, composed, slightly cynical. In faculty meetings, I was the one who scoffed at astrology, rolled my eyes at ghost stories, and shut down metaphysical speculation with scientific studies. But inside, a quiet storm brewed. Every night, when the house was quiet and the distractions faded, the memories returned. I saw the angel Lumiel. I heard the songs of the stream beneath the golden bridge. I felt again the love that had filled my entire being. It never truly left me. I began having recurring nightmares, falling endlessly through darkness, screaming in silence. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Holden would hold me, whisper reassurances, but I could never tell him the real reason. I had tried to lock the near-death experience in a mental box, hoping it would stay buried, but it didn't. It followed me softly at first, then with more urgency. Looking back now, I realize how much energy I wasted trying to suppress a moment that was meant to awaken me. Inde pre-igial but tiberi. I missed so many opportunities, chances to heal, to understand, to grow spiritually, all because I was afraid to face the unknown. But the truth finds its way. 35 years had passed. 35 years of silence, of diversion, of retreating into reason. I had become a master at steering conversations away from anything even remotely spiritual. And yet, the universe, or God, or fate, wasn't finished with me. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Holden was lounging on the couch, flipping through channels, while I sat at the dining table correcting a stack of essays. "Erin, come here. You have to see this," he called, his voice laced with an urgency I hadn't heard in years. I sighed, put down my pen, and walked over. On the TV, a woman in her 50s was sitting across from a talk show host. Her eyes shimmered with tears as she spoke, her hands gesturing with sincerity. "I was clinically dead for 11 minutes, she said, "and what I saw, it changed my entire life." Holden looked at me. "Listen to her," he whispered. I wanted to turn away. But I couldn't. The woman continued, describing a place filled with radiant light, an overwhelming presence of love, a being who guided her, an angel, she said. Goosebumps rippled down my arms. She spoke of a feeling of unity, of knowing everything at once, of being deeply connected to every living soul. She described my experience, word for word. My throat tightened, my knees weakened. I sat down slowly, as if in a trance. Her name is Morgan Dunham, the host announced, and she's here to share her remarkable journey. Her name was Morgan Dunham, and she talked about her own near-death experience. At first, I tried to step away, mumbling something about needing to get back to my grading, but something about Morgan's words rooted me in place. She described sensations and visions eerily similar to my own. The intense, all-encompassing light, the overwhelming peace, the presence of otherworldly beings. It was as if she were reading my buried memories aloud, giving voice to an experience I had long locked away. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing grew shallow, my hands trembled in my lap. It was as though a door I had spent decades trying to keep closed was suddenly being forced open from the other side. Images rushed back with startling clarity. Images I had spent years pushing into the dark corners of my mind. Holden must have noticed my unease. He gently reached for my hand, eyes filled with worry. "Erin," he whispered, "are you all right?" I couldn't speak. Tears slid down my cheeks, uninvited, and I made no effort to stop them. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. It was something else entirely. Relief, recognition, release. When the interview ended, we sat in silence. Holden didn't ask anything further. He simply wrapped his arms around me and held me close while I wept. For the first time in decades, I no longer felt alone in what I had gone through. Over the next 3 months, I plunged headfirst into research about spirituality, consciousness, and near-death experiences. I devoured books, watched documentaries, joined online discussion groups. With each new piece of information, I felt a little less like an outsider. For the first time, I could revisit my own experience without shame or denial. I began to see it for what it was, not a hallucination, not a weakness of mind, but a glimpse into something larger, something sacred. I remember staying up one night, reading the account of a neurosurgeon who had gone through a similar event. As I closed the final chapter, Holden found me curled up on the couch, weeping quietly. But this time, they were tears of understanding, of joy. "I think I finally get it," I told him. "I understand what happened to me back then. It was a period of profound transformation. My worldview, my values, my very identity began to shift. It felt like waking up after a long, restless sleep and seeing the world through a new lens, one tinted with purpose, beauty, and awe. I began meditating daily, something I used to scoff at in my more rigid years. And though it didn't replicate what I felt during my near-death experience, it gave me a space to reconnect with that peace, that stillness beyond the mind. Holden and I grew closer. I finally opened up to him fully, telling him every detail I had once kept hidden. His response was nothing short of grace. He listened with his whole heart, asked thoughtful questions, and never once judged. His quiet faith had always been a mystery to me. Now, I could finally see the strength in it. As I embraced this renewed understanding of life, a great burden lifted. I no longer needed to pretend. The fear, the confusion, the guilt, they melted away, replaced by clarity and intention. One afternoon, I felt it was time to speak with my mother about that strange incident in Asia, the one I had never truly addressed. We sat in her backyard garden, the sun filtering through the trees. I hesitated at first, unsure how to begin. "Mom," I said gently, "do you remember when I was traveling through Asia in the 70s? She looked up from her knitting, eyebrows raised. "Of course I do. There was a day I heard your voice. You called my name, warned me. I never told you, but do you remember anything unusual that day?" She paused, then placed her knitting in her lap. Her eyes softened. "I do, actually," she said. "I had a vivid dream. I saw you surrounded by strangers and I panicked. I called your name out loud. When I woke up, I couldn't shake the feeling that you were in danger." I sat back in awe. After all these years, she'd never mentioned it. And I had spent a lifetime dismissing her instincts as overprotective quirks. But she had known, somehow, across space and time. She had known. We spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories, experiences neither of us had dared speak about before. It was a turning point, a moment of healing. I realized then that I had spent so much of my life hiding from a part of myself that was not broken, but sacred. And I also began to accept that mystery and science were not enemies. They could coexist. There was room in my mind for logic and wonder, for the measurable and the miraculous. Back at work, I felt a stirring to make some changes. As a teacher, I had always focused on facts, on verifiable knowledge. But now, I found myself weaving in discussions about diverse belief systems, worldviews, and the unknown. I wasn't preaching, I was opening doors. To my surprise, the students responded with eagerness. They shared their family traditions, their questions, their fears. The classroom became a space not just for learning, but for reflection. One day, after a lesson on cultural views of the afterlife, a shy student approached me after class. With watery eyes, she whispered, "I almost drowned once. I saw a light. I felt like I was being held by something. But I never told anyone. I thought they'd think I was making it up." I knelt beside her and held her hand. "You're not alone," I said, "and you're not crazy." In that moment, I understood my purpose wasn't just personal, it was communal. I had been given this experience not only to grow from it, but to help create safe spaces where others could do the same. Soon I began organizing small gatherings in my home, quiet circles where people could share their stories, their doubts, their visions. No judgment, just honesty. Holden was thrilled. "You've found your peace," he told me one night, pulling me close. "And now you're helping others find theirs." He was right. The war inside me, the battle between logic and mystery, was over. I had made peace with both. Looking back, I feel compassion for the woman I once was. She wasn't wrong for being skeptical. She was scared of being laughed at, of being wrong, of being vulnerable. But now, at 58 years old, I feel more alive, more whole than I ever did at 28. My near-death experience is no longer a source of fear. It's a cornerstone of who I am. It taught me that the universe is far wider than we imagine, and that love is its primary force. It taught me that we are all connected by threads unseen, by stories untold. And most of all, it taught me that being open to the unknown doesn't weaken reason. It completes it. This transformation didn't stay inside me. It shaped how I walked through the world, how I engaged with others, how I listened, and finally I realized I had a unique responsibility to use my experience to enrich the education I offered my students. I began incorporating discussions about philosophy, spirituality, and the nature of consciousness into my classroom in subtle, respectful ways. It wasn't about preaching or pushing beliefs, far from it. I simply wanted to open space for dialogue, for curiosity, for reflection. To my surprise, many of my students, especially those who had once seemed disengaged, began to participate eagerly. They asked questions, challenged ideas, shared family beliefs, and for the first time, our classroom felt alive with meaning beyond the textbooks. One day, I proposed a project to interview people from different cultural or religious backgrounds about what they believed happened after death. The response exceeded every expectation. Students came back with rich stories, profound insights, and most of all, a new respect for perspectives they'd never considered before. Word of my approach got around. One afternoon, I was summoned to the principal's office. I expected a warning, perhaps even a reprimand. but instead she smiled and said, "Erin, I've been getting calls from parents. They say their children are more thoughtful, more curious, more engaged. Whatever you're doing, don't stop." At home, my relationship with Holden also deepened. The quiet spaces between us were now filled with real conversations about existence, purpose, presence. We even began meditating together in the mornings, something I had once dismissed as woo-woo nonsense. Holden said to me one morning, as we sat together in stillness, "It's like I married you twice. First, the woman I fell in love with, and now this version of you, so full of light and honesty, and I love you both." My relationship with my mother also evolved. We explored the strange intuitive bond we had shared all our lives, and slowly I began to see that our connection had always stretched beyond the physical. Once we admitted to each other that we often sensed each other's emotions from across the country. What would have once frightened me now fascinated me. Not everything was easy. Some longtime friends pulled away. They didn't understand the new version of me. My shift unnerved them. I could see it in their eyes, a discomfort they couldn't name. And while it hurt, I understood. I had been that person once. But as some relationships faded, others emerged. I met people on similar journeys. Seekers, skeptics, scientists turned spiritual. Together we began expanding our ideas of what it meant to live with curiosity and humility. Soon, I began giving small talks to local groups about my near-death experience. At first, I was nervous. I expected the same skepticism I had once harbored. But instead, people thanked me. They cried. They opened up. Many of them had carried secret stories, dreams, visions, encounters, and never dared to share them. I became a mirror that gave them permission. One unforgettable moment came when I was invited to speak at a regional medical conference. I thought the doctors and specialists would politely dismiss my story, but afterward a neurosurgeon approached me and said, "Your experience made me question everything I thought I understood about consciousness." It didn't stop there. I was invited to contribute to scientific studies on near-death experiences. I accepted without hesitation. It felt like a bridge was finally forming between science and the spiritual, two worlds that had long seemed opposed but were in fact asking the same questions. Through it all, I remained cautious not to turn into someone I once would have mocked, a self-proclaimed guru with all the answers. That wasn't who I was. I kept my feet grounded, my mind critical. But I also allowed space for wonder, and that balance became my guide. Looking back now, it's clear that my near-death experience was the beginning of a lifelong transformation. Once a skeptical, closed-off teacher, I had become someone willing to live in the mystery. Someone open, curious, and unafraid to say, "I don't know, but I want to learn." More than anything, I had learned to appreciate each moment, to greet each day with gratitude. Life wasn't just a list of accomplishments or boxes to check. It was a living, breathing miracle. Now, sitting in my quiet home office, surrounded by student drawings, handwritten letters, and worn-out books, I find myself reflecting often. It's hard to believe so many years have passed since that operating room, since Dr. Sullivan, calm and brilliant, leaned over and said, "We're almost there." He had no idea how close I had actually come. What I experienced wasn't just a dream, and it certainly wasn't a hallucination. It was real, more real than this desk, these pages, even my own reflection in the window. It showed me that life doesn't end with death. It continues. It evolves. It transforms. That realization didn't erase my fear of dying. I'm still human. I still flinch at the unknown. But now, fear doesn't paralyze me. It propels me. It reminds me to live. Another lesson I carry is the importance of humility. For years, I let my intellect build walls around me. I dismissed anything I couldn't dissect. But now, I see that true wisdom lies in holding space for mystery. Logic and intuition don't have to fight. They can sit side by side, Science and spirituality aren't rivals, they're companions. The love I felt during my near-death experience wasn't romantic or even familial. It was divine, pure, absolute. And that love didn't belong just to the next world. It's here, now, in every smile, every act of kindness, every shared breath. I try to bring that energy into everything I do, whether it's comforting a student, thanking a cashier, or pausing to admire the sunlight through the trees. I've learned that love, when practiced consistently, changes everything. The experience also taught me how interconnected we all are. Nothing we do exists in isolation. Every word, every gesture, every thought sends out ripples. I live now with more awareness, more intention. Another eye-opening realization was about consciousness itself. My NDE showed me that it wasn't confined to the brain. It was something vaster, a field we tap into rather than own. It made me rethink everything I thought I knew about what it meant to be alive. It made me rethink everything I thought I knew about what it meant to be alive. Eventually, I also discovered the healing power of storytelling. For decades, I kept my experience buried. I feared ridicule, feared being misunderstood. But when I began to share, I found community. I found resonance. I started hosting story circles, informal gatherings in my living room, where people shared their strangest truths. No judgment, no analysis, just space. Holden sat beside me in every one of them, always supportive, always proud. "You've come full circle," he said one night, his arm around my shoulder. "You've made peace with it all." And I had. For the first time since that sacred moment in the light, I felt whole, not because I had all the answers, but because I had stopped pretending I needed them. I accepted myself, the logical and the spiritual, the teacher and the mystic. Now, at 58 years old, I no longer see my near-death experience as a fluke or an anomaly. I see it as a gift, a rare invitation to look beyond the veil and come back changed. To anyone reading this who has gone through something similar, I want to say this: your experience matters. You're not crazy. You're not alone. Let your story breathe. And if you haven't had such an experience, I ask only this: stay open. Let mystery be your teacher too. The universe is far more wondrous than we've been taught. And just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it isn't true. As I write these final words, I feel gratitude swelling in my chest. For the teachers, the skeptics, the believers, the students, the strangers, each one has shaped this journey. Life isn't a straight path. It bends, twists, surprises, but that's the beauty of it. Because in the end, that's what really matters, not the destination, but the journey.